Excellent. So for these kits, you're going to need, number one, you're going to need your Edible Alchemy Sauerkraut kit. You're going to need a pair of gloves, and this is to protect you from the salt because we're going to be grinding up cabbage, mixing salt into our hands, and that could be a little bit abrasive. So I like to have a little protection so that we can just enjoy it and not have to nurse our wounds for a little bit afterwards. So let's grab one of our kits. Today we'll just make traditional. The first thing we're going to need is a head of cabbage. So just a nice medium-sized head of cabbage. You're going to need 2 glass quart jars or a half-gallon jar. And the kits are designed to be able to fill half a gallon or 2 quart jars themselves. So open up our kit. It's going to come with our flavor and our spice package, as well as our pink Himalayan sea salt. This is going to be everything you need right here, these 2 items, to make a traditional style sauerkraut. The next thing you need is a cutting board. You're going to need a knife. And you need the sauerkraut instruction manual. So once you have everything in place, then we can get started. All right, so we're going to need our bus tubs. And our bus tub is so that we can mix everything together so that we can make sure everything is evenly distributed. We can really juice it up and get it going. So I'm going to have you cut it in half, the cabbage. Watch your fingers, please.
Yeah. Do you want us to do this?
Oh, perfect. So once it's cut in half, we have this beautiful tree right here, the core of the cabbage itself. We're going to want to cut that core out. It's a little fibrous, doesn't make a great fermented product. So with our knife, and I'm going to have you hold this right here, and just have you cut at an angle, kind of like a V.
All the way through?
All the way through, yeah. Perfect. So now it's decored, and that's kind of what we want. And now we're just going to shred the cabbage. We're going to cut it into about a 1/4-inch slice, keeping each slice relatively even. And here, if I could have you start shredding that.
Slice this way?
Yeah, that sounds good. Either way. And the idea is that you're going to want to evenly slice each piece so that it ferments at the same pace.
Does it matter how big the pieces are?
The pieces don't matter a whole lot, how big you cut them, but make sure each piece you cut is relatively the same as every other piece. Kind of want to keep it even. We recommend a 1/4-inch slice. So this right here it's a little bit, it's fine. You know, it's totally fine. It's going to make a great slaw. This is about a 1/2-inch slice in thickness. A little bit less than this, but this is actually fine. You can work with this. It's going to make a great sauerkraut. Keeping in mind, the thicker the vegetable matter, it's going to take a little bit longer to ferment fully. And another key is making sure each slice is kind of evenly cut. So if you do 1/2-inch, make sure all the other ones are 1/2-inch. If you do a 1/4.
So I think a good science experiment too. So if you have students doing different sizes,
yes.
What's going to happen when you have really thin slices versus really thick slices?
Right. So what we're doing is we're exposing surface area to the bacteria. The bacteria is already on the cabbage itself right now. They're on the skin. They're already there. The lactobacilli are already there. The lactobacilli bacteria. And so then we're going to dump all those shredded pieces in here. See, it's the fluffing period right now. It's the fluffing step. We fluff up the cabbage. We don't have to break it up too much because the next step is we're going to take the flavoring and the salt and we're going to apply it to the cabbage, and it's going to do a number of things. Number one, it's going to create the right environment for the lactobacilli or lactic acid bacteria to be able to grow very well or efficiently. It's also going to ward off other pathogenic bacteria, other types of microbes that we don't want to grow, types of molds, fungi, things like that. As well as the mechanical action of the salt itself is going to expose all the surface areas of the cabbage and draw out the water. It's going to create a brine. And that's kind of what we want to do. And so that's why we add the salt to it, because it's kind of, you build a home and they'll come, right? So once everyone's ready and you have your cabbage, then take the seasoning and flavor and you're just going to dump it on top. Oh, kind of like that. The salt has 3 main uses. Number one, it's going to create the right environment for our lactic acid bacteria to be able to grow and proliferate, because that's what we're growing, lactic acid bacteria, all different kinds. You know, lactobacillus, and different types of lactobacilli. The salt is going to draw out the water from the cabbage using water gradient, so it's going to pull it out because there's no water on the outside of the cells, And the water's like, I don't want to be in this unsalty environment, so it's going to come out of the cabbage. It's also going to, the mechanical action of the hard salt's going to break down and create, open up the surface area of the cabbage itself, so we can really create the right saline environment for the bacteria to proliferate. And it also, the amount of salt that's in there is going to ward off and have a very good effect of preventing different types of pathogenic microbes from being able to grow, because they can't tolerate high saline environments. And that's what we're going after, is the bacteria that we are growing, they can tolerate it to an extent. And that's kind of what makes them be able to survive, and what makes these kits so wonderful and sauerkraut work is they're okay with it. They don't like it, but they're okay with it, and so they'll grow in it. And so they'll be happy with it, and they're safe to eat. All right, so now that we have this in here, we're going to smush it. So we're going to squish it. So I'm going to have you help me. We're just going to spread out the cabbage and break it down. This is the dirty part. It's really fun to do. Just get into it. And you really want to squish it. And after about 30 seconds to a minute, you'll notice the sauerkraut, the cabbage is going to start looking kind of wet. You know, it happens pretty quick. So you want to do that for another few minutes. You really want it goopy looking.
You want it goopy looking?
Goopy, oh yeah, absolutely. That's less work later if it's already goopy looking. It's goopy enough if you can kind of squeeze it and it drips like that. You just want a light squeeze, and if it's dripping, then you're like, okay, that's kind of odd. That's working great. Yeah, that's kind of what you want. And once you start seeing it drip like that, when you squeeze it, then it's ready to get to the next phase of jarring it. So we're going to take one of our jars, and we're just going to start packing it right into these jars. So you're going to really want to, once you start jarring it, you're going to really want to start packing it down as well. So as you're packing into jars, you're going to really want to start pressing down, compressing it down. It is a little hard. Sometimes you can use like a dowel. If you're very careful, you can use the back end of the knife.
Maybe not for students.
Not for the students.
Right. Maybe you can get like one of those little
A stamper, yeah, or like a masher. Mallet.
mallet. That's, oh, what mallet? What is it called? Is it mallet? Pellet. No. Pestle.
The jars that we had filled up, from just that head of cabbage, it only fills up the jar about halfway, 3/4 for each jar. And that's completely normal, because if you look at how much volume this was taking before, there's a lot of empty air in here. And we're really compressing it down, because the lactobacilli, the lactic acid bacteria we're growing, they're anaerobic. They grow underwater, outside of oxygen. That's looking really good. You can really start to see the brine starting to appear, like it's getting really bubbly and really wet right there. So once we start seeing that brine, then we're going to move on to the next phase. Perfect. Oh, and go ahead, Regina, and push down on the sides too, because we want the entire surface to be kind of levelly pushed down, so that it's not uneven at all. Because the bacteria that we grow, they're totally fine and they work great and they survive well as long as they're submerged underneath the brine. If any cabbage piece is floating or it's exposed to oxygen, that's when that's really the only times you're gonna see any sort of unwanted growth, molds, other types of bacteria. So you'll know that you have enough brine if you can kind of tilt the jar, and you can see a nice amount of liquid right here. That's the brine itself. And so the next step is we're going to want to clean off the sides of our jars. So we want to protect our blossoming fermentation. And so the bacteria, they grow in the water itself, and that's where they ferment the best. And so we want to create the right conditions for them. And that involves wiping down all the sides, even that little tiny errant piece of cabbage, just push it down or pull it out. It's going to give you the best experience. You're going to have the greater amount of success in making a sauerkraut itself, having it ferment effectively. So once you feel like you've developed the brine and you're ready for the next step, now that we've kind of made the sauerkraut, we've built the home, we're going to need a protector. We're going to put the defenses up. And that involves making sure that the cabbage stays submerged underneath the brine. And to do that, you need some sort of weight to keep it compressed down. Because the cabbage, even though there's a lot of liquid in here, you can see the cabbage is kind of floating a little bit, and it'll start to float a little bit. But if you have some way to keep it compressed down, then the cabbage has no opportunity to be exposed to oxygen. What you can do is you can line it using a Ziploc bag, a little trash bag like this, and then at your sink, you're going to fill it for a quart. You're going to put about 8 ounces of water. It doesn't have to be exact. You kind of want to eyeball it. And then you want to take a look after you add some water. Let me set this right here. Thank you. So that we can see that it's evenly pushing down on all sides. So if you look closely here, you can see there's some exposed areas to oxygen. So I'm just going to use my finger to kind of push and wiggle it, being very careful, so that all areas are underneath the brine itself. And then we're just going to seal this on top, close it up. Just like that. So if everyone come on up and take a look so you can see how it's, oh, this area needs in the back. Yeah, a little bit right there. So you want to make sure that it's completely covered. Every area is covered so that there's only liquid on all sides around. Try to get as much rid of this bubbling as possible. And then you're going to want to put your jar on a dish or in a bowl, because the first 2 stages in the fermentation process of sauerkraut, it's known as heterofermentive stages, meaning that it's going to produce gas. You're going to get gas producers for the first 2 different types of microbes. The last type of microbe typically doesn't produce gas, but what that means is that it could create a little bit of a mess because of the gas that it's producing, which is kind of exciting because with glass you can see it actively ferment. You can see the gas forming, and that's the fun part. You actively see this transformative process. And you're going to want to store this in your pantry, on the counter, anywhere where there is no direct sunlight, where the temperature doesn't fluctuate a lot. And you're just going to want to let it ferment for anywhere from 7 to 21 days, upwards 28 days, keeping in mind that after a week, and the longer you let it ferment, it's going to get more and more sour. So try it after the first week, then after the second week, then after the third week. And once it reaches a point where you're happy with it, with the flavor, stick it in your refrigerator. The cold temperature of the refrigerator is going to prevent it from continuing to become more sour and ferment even longer. The first 2 stages, the first couple weeks of fermentation, you don't want to put on a lid that's going to seal it, because you're going to trap gas, and when you trap gas, you're either going to break the glass, you're going to break the lid, you're going to break the lid and the glass. It's going to just explode, or it could just lightly crack. Either way, it's not a safe environment for you or for the bacteria. So just leave the baggie in there, or whatever weight you're using, for the first couple weeks. The first 2 stages are gas-forming types of bacteria that will grow and produce a lot of gas. And then the final stage typically is not, but until you're ready to refrigerate your sauerkraut, don't put a lid on it. Just put like a cloth top on it if you want, or just leave it as it is. I mean, it's a very caustic environment in there. A lot of pathogens, a lot of things that will get us sick that are called putrefied foods as opposed to fermented foods, typically don't grow in these kinds of conditions. And then so we create the right environment, we add enough salt to ward them off. The bacteria produce a lot of acid to ward them off. We use some sort of weight to prevent them from actually growing in there. So all these kind of productive and constructive steps will reduce the opportunities for pathogens and unwanted growth from happening in our sauerkraut itself. That being said, if you do see something, best practices, throw it away. Don't try to scoop it out. You don't know. Yeah, it could be deeper in there. It could just be surface mold. I don't recommend doing it just because, yeah. It could get you sick. It could not get you sick. It's better to just throw away and start again and figure out what happened, you know? Yes. Thank you.